Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 651, and today is August 6th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about in today's show, but first, I want to mention the sponsor of the show, and for the next month or so, that's going to be the Expat Money Summit 2024. It's the largest offshore event taking place entirely online from October 7th through the 11th, put on by Mikhail Thorup, the host of the Expat Money Show, and a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. So you'll be able to discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You will learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B, which means how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, people might have heard of him, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, and Tom Logano. Others too. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head on over to expatmoneysummit.com. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com. And of course, the links are in the show notes wherever you are watching it. That way you could easily just click it, go right to the website, and get your complimentary ticket. And of course, anytime you use the sponsor we have on the show, it does help out the show. So I appreciate all my listeners who have already gone over and got their free tickets so far. All right, everyone, let's get into the episode today. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about the price Americans pay for Netanyahu's genocide in Gaza. First off here, 5 U.S. troops injured in rocket attack on U.S. base in Iraq. At least 5 U.S. personnel were injured in a rocket attack on the al-Assad air base in Iraq, Reuters reported on Monday, citing U.S. and Iraqi sources. The U.S. official said one of the Americans who was wounded had serious injuries and that the number of casualties could change as the damage is still being assessed. The Iraqi source said 2 rockets were fired at the base. The attack comes as the region is on the edge and expecting an Iranian reprisal attack on Israel for the killing of Hamas's political chief in Tehran. Iran's allies, including Shia militias in Iraq, have taken credit for previous rocket attacks on U.S. bases, could be involved in the response. The U.S. is vowing it will defend Israel from any Iranian reprisal, making it possible that U.S. military assets are being targeted in coordinated response by Iran and its allies. There is no sign yet Iran's reprisal has started, and the rocket attack on the American airbase in Iraq is likely a response to U.S. airstrikes the U.S. launched in Iraq last week. And I would say, it's worth noting here that a lot of the tensions between the Shia militias in Iraq and the Americans have flared since October 7th due to the ongoing fighting in Gaza. So the U.S. bombed the Popular Mobilization Forces, or the PMF, on July 30th. A coalition of and the PMS are a coalition of mainly Shia militias that are part of Iraq's security force. The strike on the PMS was strongly condemned by the Iraqi government, the U.S.'s supposed partner in the country. The U.S. bombed the PMF after a rocket attack targeted U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria, which caused no damage or casualties. From October of 2023 to February, U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria came under 100 of rockets attack and drone attacks. Iraqi Shia militias began the attacks in response to U.S. support for the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. After 3 U.S. troops were killed in an attack on Tower 22, a secretive U.S. base in Jordan on the Syrian border, the Iranian and Iraqi governments pressured the militias to stop, and there have only been a handful of attacks since February. Earlier this year, the Iraqi prime minister called for the U.S. to withdraw from Iraq over U.S. airstrikes on the PMFs. The U.S. and Iraq have entered talks on the future of the U.S. military presence, and Baghdad reportedly wants to the drawdown to begin in September, but no concrete plans have been announced. And so again, it's because these tensions are going on in the Middle East. It's not only the genocide going on in Gaza, but how much more Israel is escalating the tensions by carrying out these assassinations in Iraq and Lebanon that are really exacerbating it, and that is putting our American soldiers in danger. We're always told that the reason we have to support Israel is it's really about American national security. It's for the benefit of me, you, and every single other American that we are providing all this support to Israel. But when you actually look at what is going on the ground and how it impacts the safety of American troops and just Americans in general, it's pretty clear that Israel is making all of us less safe. And of course, you do have that risk of essentially blowback, killing American soldiers in the Middle East in conflicts with other militias like these PMFs and things like that. I do think, it's also worth noting that terrorism is a possibility in the United States of America or in other places in the West because of this policy that when we'll get into some of the stories today about just the absolute horrors going on in Gaza. This is going to drive some people mad. It absolutely has in the past. The Israeli treatment of the Palestinians was a core reason a lot of people a lot of the 20 hijackers and planners and things like that participated in the 9/11 attacks. Was because of America's support for Israel as they ethnically cleansed and brutalized the Palestinians. And as that has only gotten worse and worse and worse, it means that kind of terrorism is once again going to become likely. That's not to justify any of it, but it is to say that if we weren't supporting Israel, we wouldn't be generating this hatred towards Americans and putting ourselves at this kind of risk. Now, one would think that the White House is really pressuring Israel to ramp down tensions in the Middle East. They're saying like, "Hi, we gotta reduce this. We gotta make sure that." Kind of similar to April after the Iranian strike, then we really start to reduce tensions, but it doesn't seem to be going this way. Israel is considering launching preemptive strikes on Iran as it is awaiting a reprisal attack for the assassination of Hamas's political chief in Iran. According to Israeli media reports, Israel could launch an attack on Iran if it finds an Iranian strike is imminent. The idea was discussed on Sunday night in a meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his top military and intelligence officials. Iranian officials have made it clear they will respond to the killing of the chief of Hamas's political bureau, Hania, on Iranian soil, and any Israeli preemptive strike would just escalate the situation even more. U.S. and Israeli officials believe an Iranian attack could happen any day, and it is expected that Hezbollah will be involved in the operation as the Lebanese government vowed a response to the Israeli strike that killed one of its top commanders in Beirut. Iran's allies in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen could also join in the attack on Israel. And those allies in Iraq are, of course, the Shia militias that we're just talking about that carried out the rocket attack on the U.S. soldiers. The U.S. has deployed additional warships and warplanes to the Middle East for the purpose of defending Israel, making U.S. military assets potential targets in the reprise attack. Back in April, Iran directly attacked Israel for the first time in response to the Israeli bombing of an Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. The U.S. and some of its allies, including the UK and Jordan, helped defend Israel from the attack, intercepting many of the 300 missiles and drones that were fired at Israeli territory. U.S. officials expect the reprisal attack for the Hania killings to be even bigger. And you would assume so, as it had to be far more embarrassing to the Iranians. Look, Syria has been in a state of war for over 12 years now. And so the idea that one of their consulate buildings was bombed in Damascus, I am not surprised the Iranians did what they did in response to that attack. At the same time, it is in a country at war where it's really a major break of international norms for Israel to attack that facility. At the same time, I don't think it's necessarily embarrassing for the Iranians that they say weren't able to defend that facility from an Israeli missile strike. Now, with whatever happened in Tehran, whether it was a short-range missile, a planted bomb, or some other kind of explosion that killed Hania, it is worth, I think, noting that from the Iranian perspective, this has to be seen as marginally more embarrassing for them that they weren't able to essentially protect a foreign dignitary in Iran for the inauguration of their new president. You would expect that would be a safe place, and that it wasn't. I think Iran is going to look to make a major statement in response. All right, so let's get into what's happening in Gaza. Israel sends truck full of dead Palestinians into Gaza. This one from Dave DeCamp. On Monday, over 80 bodies of unidentified Palestinians were buried in a mass grave in Khan Yunis after they were sent into Gaza on a truck by Israel. The director of the Palestinian Civil Emergency Services in Khan Yunis told Reuters it was unclear if the dead Palestinians were exhumed by Israeli forces from graveyards in Gaza or if they were tortured and killed in Israeli detention facilities. He said, "The occupation provided us with no information about the names or ages or anything. This is a war crime. It's a crime against humanity." Israeli forces had dug up cemeteries across Gaza, claiming the purpose was to look for the remains of Israeli hostages. Gaza's government media office has said Israel has taken 2,000 bodies out of Gaza. The Israeli human rights organization Bet Telem published a report on Monday that said 60 Palestinians have died in Israeli detention facilities since October 7th. The report said the facilities have become torture camps under the direction of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. On Monday, Israeli airstrikes continued to pound the Gaza Strip. Gaza's health ministry said at least 40 Palestinians were killed, bringing the death toll since October 7th up to at least 39,623, and of course that doesn't include the thousands of Palestinians who are missing under the rubble and presumed dead. So yeah, who knows where those bodies come from, but it's absolutely a horror show that Israel is burying scores of bodies at a time in these mass graves. All right, let's go with this one next. So the Israeli finance minister, that's Bezalel Smotrich, said Monday that it might be moral and justified for Israel to starve 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, but said it couldn't due to international pressure. So Smotrich said in a conference hosted by Israel Hayom, according to the Times of Israel, "We are bringing in aid because there is no choice. We can't, in the current global reality, manage a war. Nobody will let us cause 2 million civilians to die of hunger, even though it might be justified and moral, until our hostages are returned. Humanitarianism in exchange for humanitarianism is morally justified, but what can we do? We live today in a certain reality. We need international legitimacy for this war." So the Israeli finance minister is also portrayed as a fringe extremist in Israeli politics, but he has significant power as the finance minister and also holds a position in the defense ministry that puts him in charge of the West Bank settlements. He's threatened to quit the government if a hostage deal with Hamas is reached. And, he's made other threats dealing with any kind of really letting up of the Israeli genocidal campaign in Gaza. He'll say, "Oh, we'll leave the government." Now, again, there have been members of the, I hate saying more moderate factions of the Israeli government, but the opposition to Netanyahu, at least like Yair Lapid, there are significant political factions in Israel who are willing to to guarantee Netanyahu that his government will not collapse if he goes ahead and ends this war and accepts a deal. And Netanyahu isn't doing that anyways. And so sometimes I think it's unfairly portrayed as just these right wingers really forcing Netanyahu into this mess in Gaza, and that's why he can't get himself out of it. But in reality, I think Netanyahu wants this policy as well. And it seems to me more that Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others are really just covering Netanyahu's right flank rather than actually driving Netanyahu further and further to the right and preventing any talks from happening. All right, next up here, Israel Hamas hostage deal talks on hold after Haniyeh assassination. This Dave DeCamp, August 5th, antiwar.com. Hostage deal talks between Israel and Hamas are on hold following the Israeli assassination of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh, the Times of Israel reported on Monday. Haniyeh was the top Hamas official outside Gaza, putting him in charge of the negotiations with Israel. He was a proponent of reaching a deal with Israel, and his assassination is seen as an effort by Netanyahu to ensure that won't happen. Israeli officials told the Times that hostage deal talks would not restart until after Iran launches an attack on Israel as a reprisal killing for Haniyeh in Tehran. Hamas also needs time to name a replacement for Haniyeh for talks to resume. The report said that the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt understand that talks will become much more difficult in the wake of the assassination. The situation with Iran could also escalate to a full-blown regional war involving the U.S., which would make a hostage deal even less likely. In the weeks leading up to the Haniyeh assassination, it was widely acknowledged that Netanyahu was sabotaging the chances of talks and a ceasefire deal by making new demands after Hamas made concessions. Over the weekend, Haaretz reported that President Biden realized Netanyahu was lying to him about wanting a hostage deal, but the U.S. has still not publicly criticized Netanyahu and is vowing to defend Israel from any Iranian reprisal attack. And so just think about this for a second, right? Where you have Israel effectively undermining and preventing any deal from taking place, and then you have a top Israeli minister, the finance minister, out there saying that we could starve the Palestinians until they make a hostage deal. Well, if you're undercutting the hostage deal talks, then you're effectively just implementing a starvation policy for 2 million people. I mean, that's the kind of outright horrific genocide that everybody should be opposed to and be firmly against. But it's just there's so much forgiveness for what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's unbelievable. All right, let's move on here and talk about Europe just a little bit. Poll shows Germans oppose new U.S. missile deployments. So this a new poll about a planned U.S. missile deployment to Germany shows that more Germans are opposed to the idea than in favor of it. The U.S. recently announced that starting in 2026, it will be deploying missile systems that were previously banned by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, which prohibited land-based missile systems with a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. The poll was conducted by the Forsa Institute found that 49% of Germans think the new missile deployment is not right, while 45% support the idea. Opposition is stronger among Germans living in states that used to be East Germany, with 74% of them against the plan. The U.S. announced the deployment in a joint statement with Germany, but German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is facing opposition to the plan from within his own party and coalition government. A member of the Social Democrat Party, and that is Scholz's party, said not every weapon makes Germany fundamentally immediately safer. Danger of unintentional military escalation is considerable. So senior members of the SDP who are concerned about the deployment said they would call a debate about it in September. They said in a note seen by Politico, the current debate surrounding the announced stationing of long-range conventional weapon systems in Germany concerns us all. The U.S. announced it would deploying would include Tomahawk missiles, which are nuclear capable and have a range of over 1,000 miles. Tomahawks are typically used on U.S. Navy destroyers and submarines, since the land-based version of them was banned by the INF Treaty. The U.S. also said it will send SM-6 missiles to Germany, which signals it's planning to deploy the Typhoon missile system. The Typhoon is a covert system concealed within a 40-foot shipping container that can fire Tomahawks and SM-6 missiles. The SM-6 hit targets 290 miles away, below the level previously banned by the INF Treaty. Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed Russia will respond to the deployment by ending its moratorium on deploying missiles previously banned by the INF Treaty. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, said he wouldn't rule out the idea of Moscow deploying nuclear-armed missiles in response. Next up, Zelensky says Ukraine and the whole world wants Russia at a peace summit. So Zelensky has said that Kiev and the, quote, whole world want Russia to participate in a peace summit to discuss peace in Ukraine. Zelensky has organized several international meetings that have been billed as peace summits, but Russia hasn't been invited to attend. The most recent one was hosted by Switzerland, and some countries were critical of the lack of Russian participation. So Zelensky told reporters on Tuesday, the majority of the world today says that Russia must be represented at the second summit, otherwise we will not achieve meaningful results. Since the whole world wants them at the table, we cannot be against it. Zelensky first said in July that he wants Russia to attend the next summit, which marked a significant shift in his position. He previously ruled out negotiations with Russia unless it withdrew from all territory captured in Ukraine, which is a non-starter for Moscow. Russia has said that it's open to peace talks with Ukraine, but the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Thursday that there are still no concrete plans for a summit. First of all, so far there is no summit with Russian participation being planned. From time to time, we hear such sporadic mushings on Russian participation, he said in a radio interview. Peskov also cast doubt on Ukrainian willingness to negotiate peace, saying it would be possible to hold talks with Ukrainian officials, but impossible to trust them. Throughout the war, the only real peace negotiations and there was a deal on the table back in March and April of 2022, but the U.S. and NATO discouraged Ukraine from signing the agreement and promised to support its fight against Russia. All right, everyone, wrapping up the show today with a little bit of good news. The U.S. completes withdrawal from last base in Niger. So the U.S. military announced Monday its forces had completed the withdrawal from Airbase 201 in Niger, well ahead of the September 15th deadline for U.S. forces to exit the country. So the Pentagon and Niger's defense ministry said in a joint statement, the U.S. Department of Defense and the National Defense of the Republic of Niger announced that the withdrawal of U.S. forces and assets from Airbase 201 is complete. The effective cooperation and communication between the U.S. and Nigerian armed forces ensured that turnover was finished ahead of schedule and without complications. The New York Times said a small number of U.S. troops remain at the U.S. Embassy in Niger that will be leaving once they finish administrative duties. The U.S. began withdrawing approximately 1,000 military personnel from Niger in June and finished pulling troops out of its other bases in the country, Airbase 101, in July. Airbase 201 served as a major drone hub for the U.S. in the Sahel region and cost the U.S. over $100 million to build. The U.S. is looking to establish a similar base somewhere else in Africa and is reportedly in talks with Benin, Ivory Coast, and Ghana, but there is no signs a deal has been reached. The U.S. stopped cooperating with Nigeria's military following the 2023 coup that ousted the former president, Mohamed Bazoum. The U.S. was looking to stay in the country but was asked to leave following a meeting with the military-led government known as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland back in March. The new Nigerian prime minister said the U.S. was asked to leave due to threats made by U.S. officials in the meeting about Nigeria's relationship with Russia and Iran. All right, everybody. I know it's a little bit of a shorter show today, but that's where I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more news later in the week.